So when we're talking about the causes and what changes unemployment over the short run, right? The answer really is to look at those different types of unemployment that we learned about. And the one that is related to this is our cyclical unemployment. This is unemployment that is tied to the business cycle. So this would mean, higher employment, or higher unemployment during a recession. So from our standpoint of supply and demand, in terms of flexible and competitive labor markets, like we learned, I think, back in chapter 3 or 4, unemployment is somewhat of a puzzle, right? So let's take this into our supply and demand format. So we've got wages on the y-axis. We've got the quantity of labor on the x-axis. We've got a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve. Remember, the supply curve is our households, the demand curve is our employers. It's flipped when we talk about labor markets. And so in a labor market with flexible wages, it should be as easy as, just finding where the equilibrium is, right? Where that wage equilibrium and that quantity equilibrium lie. The number of people who want jobs equal the number of people who get jobs, right? The number of people who want jobs is the supply. The supply at this wage is exactly the same as the demand. Somebody's got a Discord message. Now, what happens is that we have what's called sticky wages. So if the wage is stuck at some value W, then at this particular point, when we then reflect this off, well, at this rate, how much are people going to be supplying? They're going to be supplying this amount. But at this rate, how much are employers going to actually demand? They're going to demand that amount, right? So we end up with a increase in the supply of labor and a decrease in the demand of labor. And when you look at that all together, that's what we call unemployment. Just the fact that our wage is stuck at a higher than equilibrium wage rate. Now, a lot of you may be asking yourselves, but why? But why is this the case? Why would wages be sticky? And in fact, let's say, why might they be sticky in the downward sense? Let's be more specific here. And so part of this has to do with what we call the implicit contract theorem. Which is essentially an unwritten agreement, right? Some sort of tacit agreement that is within the labor market that the employer will try to keep wages from falling when the economy is weak, or the business is having trouble. In exchange for the employee not expecting huge salary increases when the economy or the business is strong. So this is probably the main reason, right? And I mean, we kind of saw some of this happening during the pandemic, right? When some of these industries were really struggling, and they were instead of lowering the wages for people, they were cutting their hours, right? So it's like, okay, we're not going to, lower how much we pay you, but, you can only work, 30 hours instead of 40 hours a week. That's all we can afford. And then, when times get better, we can, bring you back up to 40 hours a week or whatever the case may be. But, I mean, in a way, too, this implicit contract, it's kind of how things are done here at CSE. We're a unionized campus, right? Which means that all the faculty are unionized, all the staff is unionized. Every 2 years, we negotiate with the administration in terms of salary increases and so on and so forth, right? And, for the most part, this holds, right? In terms of, there are some years where we don't get any pay increases, right? But, for the most part, they've held their side of the implicit contract, and they haven't decreased our wages, and they haven't laid off faculty when the economy has been, rough, or when enrollment has been down, right? And then, and with the expectation that, if the economy does rebound, stronger, and if all of a sudden we do get some boon in enrollment, and enrollment is 1,000, students more next year or whatever, right? There's the kind of understanding that, since the employer, since the administration, kind of supported us through those harsh times, that the faculty and the staff aren't going to come and say, well, we demand an increase in our salary commensurate with the increase in enrollment or something like that, right? So this is a large part of it. This is a large part of it. The next part of it, which I think is a very interesting theory, is called the efficiency wage theory. Efficiency. Well, there's an N in there. So this is a theory that the productivity of workers I can spell today, so this is either individually and as a group, will increase as the employer pays them more. My understanding of the efficiency wage theory as well is that it is just a bit more efficient to pay somebody a bit more than maybe the equilibrium wage, or maybe what you think their value of the marginal product is. It's just a bit more efficient to do that, because then there's less turnover and there's less retraining that needs to happen. All right, and our last one is our adverse selection of wage cut arguments. Adverse selection of wage cuts argument. So this is the notion that if employers reduce the wages for all workers in some company or industry or something like that, the best of them will leave. So if, all of a sudden Chadron State said, I'm going to pay all the, faculty members $10,000 less, there may be some people here that, are going to leave, that, otherwise, we would have kept, right? And those people might have been some of the most skilled. So adverse selection of wage cuts. The fact that when you do these wage cuts, it's not that you get a uniform elimination. It's that when you do across the board wage cuts, the people who are the best or the most productive are the people that are going to leave, because those are the people that it's going to be easiest to leave. If that kind of makes sense. So there's some adverse selection there. Couple more of these theories. I know I said last one, but there's a couple more I forgot about. And this kind of has to do a little bit with the efficiency wage theory model. So this notion of insider outsiders. So this is the notion that those already working for the firm are insiders who know the procedures. You don't have to train them, right? Whereas other workers are outsiders who are either recent or prospective hires. And then the last one, which I mean kind of has to do with the adverse selection of wage cuts argument, so I won't write it down again just to save our hands, but it talks about the relative wage coordination argument. So this says across the board wage cuts are hard for an economy to implement, and workers fight against them, right? So also if you start to, really cut hard, everywhere, then, you might see some unionization, some organization of the labor as a way to exercise some collective bargaining power. Questions on these different models here? Of why wages might be downwardly sticky. All right.